Welcome, hombrinos. Cardi C here, back once again like the Renegade Master. On this episode, we're going to talk about meridians. Now, meridians as a concept is fairly straightforward, but if you've never done acupuncture before, or perhaps you've learned acupuncture and you kind of heard about the words meridians but weren't entirely sure what they were, this is where I'm going to go. So I'm kind of give you an explanation about what the meridian concept is, how we use them as part of our day-to-day practice, and then kind of, give you a little bit more in-depth knowledge and understanding as to what each of the meridians do. All right, so let's get started, right? This diagram behind me here, right, I'm just going to have to move my microphone out of the way so you can still hear us as I talk. So you see on this diagram, now this is like a Leonardo da Vinci rip-off, right? The idea being that this is supposed to represent health and the whole body and mind thing. And then what we've kind of put on here is a few of the prominent meridians. So you've got the heart meridian in red. You've got the kidney meridian here in blue coming down here. You've got a little bit of the green meridian, which I think is actually a combination. I think it's the spleen supposed to be there. Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, the liver, obviously, because it's green. And then the yellow one that comes all the way down the body there is the stomach meridian. Now, I guess what to think of in the meridians is you'll notice a couple of things. You'll notice that they have set pathways, and you'll also notice that they're named after organs. So this is a good starting place, okay? So I've got my model here, right? And if you look at this model here, you'll see there's line drawings all over the shop, right? So we've got the head, we've got the arm, we've got the torso, we've got the legs, we've got the back of the legs, we've got the foot, we've got it everywhere, right? So these lines are all the way through the body. And the idea with that is that this is where energy is supposed to flow. So in traditional Chinese medicine, our energy has a set pathway in which it flows. And it goes in these meridians. And that's where it kind of goes from one meridian to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. The concept isn't about energy that kind of is more expansive. I'm not going to pretend to know loads about chakras and other energy systems, but when you hear about, I guess, other descriptions of how energy is in and around our body, you'll often hear about it being in zones, or you'll hear it about being kind of, I guess, not as restricted to a specific area. And that's just not the case in Chinese medicine, or particularly about this idea of meridians and meridian theory. Now, what happens is the meridians all are connected. And I think if you try to imagine this as like a central heating system, okay? So you get your input at one end, and it goes all the way around your house, up and down, but all of the pipes are connected, right? It's not just like one pipe and it stops. It's the whole thing's connected around, and that's what your meridians are about. So your meridians will start off at one place here. They'll come down your arm, for example. They'll get to the end of your finger. They'll then move into another meridian, which then goes back up your arm, and then it goes into another meridian that goes back down your arm, and like that, okay? And that kind of flows around your body, and I'll explain the flow in a few minutes. But that's quite a helpful concept to get your head into your head, is this idea of a central heating system, because you can have, it's all one connected system, and if one area becomes blocked, or if one area becomes an issue, that can actually have issues behind the blockage and in front of the blockage. And that's very much how meridians in Chinese medicine is kind of built on. It's this idea that it's all one connected system. Now, the word meridian is a French word for channel. So you'll sometimes see it written as channel on certain websites, in certain books. You'll see it written as the channels of Chinese medicine or the channels of acupuncture. But I would say the most common term is the word meridian, because certainly in the 1800s, French medics had a huge input into the idea and concept of acupuncture, particularly in what we now would consider more Western society. So this word meridian, although it has French origins and it's a French word for channel, it's actually used in day-to-day practice. This is the word that you'll hear on training. Certainly if you came and did training with us, we're using the words meridians all the time. Now, coming on to the namings of the meridians. So in Chinese medicine, What they thought is that the energy from meridians stimulated or originated from organs. So again, if you look at this picture behind me here, you'll see that we've got these organs here, and they will colored these organs in a color so you can see them sticking out. And then the meridian has like I guess like what you call like a collateral channel that stems from the organ itself. So if you know how I was saying about like all of the meridians kind of interconnected like this, right? And so one meridian flows into another and flows into another and flows into another. Well, that's the case, right? So that's the kind of what you call the primary channel. The secondary channels, or these kind of like tributary channels, actually come from the organs themselves. So the very first meridian in this process is called the lung meridian. So the meridian is named after the lung organ, and the lung meridian has a collateral channel, a little tributary channel that comes from the lung organ itself and feeds into that lung meridian or that lung channel. So that's a nice kind of way of thinking about, well, why were they named after what they were named for? So the lung meridian is thought to be connected to other meridians before and after, but it also has a collateral channel that comes from the specific organ itself that then feeds into the meridian. Now, that collateral channel is thought to come from like the organ's chi. So the organs themselves create chi, okay, or they have a store of chi that they then go and kind of spit out into the meridian. And so, again, if we're using the lung scenario here, that if the lung chi is strong, it is able to feed its chi from the organ into the meridian and help really strengthen that meridian up. And therefore, you're less likely, if at all, to have any problems on the lung channel or the lung meridian because the lung chi is stronger. And that is the same for all of the different organs that you have. The next thing to bear in mind is which organs. So we have the lung and the large intestine. They're a pairing, and so the lung is a yin meridian and the large intestine is a yang meridian. Now, when we're dealing with pain conditions, so if we were dealing, say, let's say you were dealing with like a lateral elbow problem, right? It doesn't really matter, or doesn't matter significantly enough which one of those meridians you'd be needling, because the large intestine and the lung kind of go over the lateral elbow. So it doesn't really matter to know whether it's yin or yang. It really matters, the yin and yang comparison, when you're thinking about more of the psychosocial health of somebody, or you want to really get into the nitty gritty of like, well, I want to make this treatment super tailored to the individual in front of us. So if I'm just treating, let's say, a lateral epicondylitis, keeping it nice and simple and straightforward, I don't feel like I need to go into any detail or depth. I'm just looking at lung points and large intestine points that are kind of in and around the lateral elbow and associated areas, and that's about it. But if I was wanting to deal with a little bit more of that, if I was going to get really into the detail, and that's how I would practice, certainly how we talk about on the foundation courses, to try and go past that superficial layer, you're going to be looking at the specifics of the acupuncture points, but you're also going to be looking at what type of meridian it is. So is it a yin meridian or a yang meridian? So yang meridians, generally speaking, this banana's fallen all over the place. Dime. This is obviously part of the high-end educational content that we're generating here, is to see, got me banana fixed. Sorry, where was I? Meridians and what they do. So, yang meridians, broadly speaking, treat pain, power, and range of movement. And that doesn't matter where it is in the body, but in effect, if you're thinking about yang meridians being very good for musculoskeletal problems, all right? Because they're predominantly aiming at pain, power, and range of movement. They do other things, they have other jobs and roles, but broadly speaking, that's what yang meridians do. Yin meridians tend to deal with systemic health issues. So something that's not located to a specific joint or a specific area of the body. It could be things like hot flushes, could be overactive bladder, it could be like IBS, it could be sleep problems. So what we would refer to maybe as a systemic health problem, yin meridians are really good for. Yin meridians are very good for the psychosocial elements. So you'll find that when you look at what a yin meridian does, its actions, it's often labeled and often referred to as doing a lot of things around psychosocial health. So anxiety, low mood, outlook on life, libido, concentration. So that's kind of what your yin meridians, broadly speaking, tend to be doing. So carrying on from that, what I was saying earlier was each of the meridians are named after an organ, and they've all got kind of specific roles and jobs. So it starts at the lung meridian. Your chi begins at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it begins in the lung meridian. The lung meridian is a yin meridian, so that means it's good for the psychosocial problems. It's quoted for things like your systemic health. And the lung has then some super specific things it does. So your lung meridian is not only responsible for the lungs as we would know in Western health conditions. So you'll see the lung meridian quoted for like breathlessness, retained phlegm, referred to about the voice quite often as well. But it also then has some references to things like grief, keeping things bottled up and not letting it go. So that can be like your super specific elements, if you like, of what the lung meridian does. The large intestine meridian is a yang meridian. So remember, yang meridians are pain, power, range of movement. And what they're very good, what the large intestine meridian will talk about is predominantly musculoskeletal type pain. That's predominantly what yang meridians do. It does have some references to what we would think the large intestine would do, excreting products, shall we say, from the body. But then it has some other kind of, not as prominent psychosocial stuff, but it does have some personality elements to it. So you'll hear things about constipation. So that's not as psychosocial as much. It's more about other bodily functions, should I say. Next, we have the stomach and the spleen. The stomach meridian in Chinese medicine is massive, right? So the lung and the large intestine are located just at your upper limb, all right? So your lung meridian starts here in the anterior chest wall, comes down the anterior lateral aspect of your upper arm, forearm, and then terminates in the lung 11 at the tip of your thumb. And your large intestine meridian goes from your index finger all the way up the posterior lateral aspect of your wrist, forearm, elbow, posterior lateral aspect of your upper arm, into your shoulder, anterior shoulder, then terminates at the other side of your nose, so kind of crosses the midline here. Fun fact, guys, all right? If you're ever in a pub quiz and the quiz master says, what is the only meridian that crosses the midline? Large intestine. There you go, guys. Facts coming out of nowhere. So that's where the large intestine goes. Now, coming back to what I was saying about the stomach meridian, it's a massive meridian, right? So lungs got 11 points on, large intestine's got 20 points on. The stomach meridian, 45 points, huge meridian. It starts from just underneath your eyelid, comes over the side of your head to the head corner of your head, down the anterior aspect of your trunk, so it goes over your nipple at stomach 17, over your anterior lateral aspect of your abdomen, and then it comes down the anterior lateral aspect of your thigh, your lower part of your lower limb, and then it terminates at stomach 45 at your second toe. You can actually see that that's one of these that we've got traced on here. So this stuff in the yellow and the gold, that's to represent where the stomach meridian goes down and terminates into the foot, into the second toe. Now, in Chinese medicine, the stomach meridian has loads of things it does. So yes, it's involved in digestion. Yes, it's involved in feeling hunger and trying to, probably not a massive surprise it talks about energy generation, because that's why we eat. We eat and drink to try and help generate energy within us. And that's no different in Chinese medicine. The stomach is thought to be really bothered about energy generation. But where I would say the stomach meridian goes a lot further in Chinese medicine is that it really comes down into things like our immune system. It talks about energy, not just like I'm feeling a little bit tired today, but really in that kind of endurance activity, really bothered about energy in all types of forms. So we talk about the stomach meridian for a whole host of reasons. It's a yang meridian, so it's going to be really good for pain, power, and range of movement for musculoskeletal problems. And if you think of the coverage of where the stomach meridian goes from and to, Facial stuff, so we find that in dental problems, we're going to be using the stomach meridian a lot. Obviously, the torso side of things, or that what goes over the chest and the abdomen, and then in the lower limb as well. So because it's a yang meridian, pain, power, range of movement, any kind of lower limb problem, particularly at the knee and the ankle, you're often looking at a stomach meridian point. They don't talk to you about this in podcast school, right? They don't talk to you about how your mic will start falling all out of the shop and you have to move things around like mid-talk. Kind of thinking, do you know who I am? Like, I'm such a big deal. I shouldn't be having to fiddle with my own mic, right? I'm Cardi C. Me bananas fell on the floor. Like, how can anybody take it seriously if I'm having to just talk into a mic with 0 banana on it? Absolutely ridiculous, right? Right. Let's see if I can get this banana working a bit better. All right. So, done the stomach meridian, yang. So we've done the stomach meridian, which is the yang meridian. Now its yin partner is the spleen. Now this is really interesting because the spleen organ in Western medicine was kind of like seen as a bit of an added extra. We didn't need the spleen. It was like, dude, the spleen was something that we had years ago. It's no longer important. And it probably wasn't that long ago that people started saying, oh, by the beard of Zeus, actually the spleen's pretty important for our immune system, right? And turns out it's pretty important, the old spleenorona, all right? But in Chinese medicine, the spleen has been forever considered to be a super duper important meridian. So the spleen meridian's yin, which means that it's going to do the psychosocial stuff and it's going to do the general health stuff. We find that a lot of the things that the spleen is quoted for is in and around women's health stuff. So we'll see a lot of stuff around menstruation. We see a lot of stuff, just periods in general, dysmenorrhea, amenorrhea. You'll see it about female fertility. In Chinese medicine, the spleen was thought to create blood. So the generation of blood in the body was down to the spleen itself. So huge emphasis, in Chinese medicine, talk a lot about the spleen, and you'll find that the spleen meridian is used for a lot of conditions, not just in pelvic health, right? But because blood, I think we can pretty much agree in Western medicine as well, blood's pretty important, no different in Chinese medicine, and that creation of blood is super important. So after the stomach and spleen, we could then move on to, where would we go next? We'll probably go on to something like the pericardium and the triple energizer. Now, here's a one where we get a little bit weird, right? Because in Western medicine, so up to this point, we've done lung, large intestine, stomach, and spleen, and those are all organs, all right? We kind of accept that they're all organs, no big deal, all right? When we get to the pericardium and the triple energizer, we'll start going a bit off piste here. The pericardium, we don't think of in Western medicine as a specific organ. It's a structure, it's a sac that kind of protects the heart, but in and of itself, it doesn't really do anything. It's not an organ in itself. In Chinese medicine, you will see a lot of what it does is very, very similar to what Chinese medicine hearts do, very similar. So it's almost like it doesn't have a huge description about what it does. Now, here's a little fun fact about this. They like the idea of balance and harmony. So yin and yang is about balance, right? It's about equals. It's about two opposites coming together. And that's what yin and yang basically means. If we've got a yin meridian, we need to have a yang counterpart and vice versa. Now, way back, there were only 11 meridians. And there wasn't a pericardium meridian at that time. And you can see where I'm going with this, because 11's an odd number. That doesn't create balance. So it seems to be that I can't remember which text it was, but like a really, really old text, which then kind of introduces the pericardium meridian. And it pretty much says, look, we're introducing this because we kind of need to have an even number, so let's whack in the pericardium, right? So it doesn't really do a lot in itself. There's one big prominent point, which is pericardium 6, which lots and lots of people know. If you haven't already, get our free acupressure guide, because we have pericardium 6 as one of our notable points to crack on with. You can use for acupressure. But other than that, it doesn't do a lot. So that's the first meridian that kind of isn't really related to what we would consider a Western organ. The second meridian is the triple energizer. I mean, and that doesn't relate to any organ or any structure that we're aware of in Western medicine. It's got loads of names. So its Chinese name is San Zhao, which means San means 3, and Zhao is a section of the body. So if I'm going to get me dude up here, right? Your body's separated into what they call 3 zhaos. So your upper zhao, your middle zhao, and your lower zhao. Your upper zhao is where your lungs and your heart are. Your middle zhao is where your things like your stomach and your liver and your spleen are all housed. And your lower zhao is where your bladder and your intestines are. So San Zhao means 3 zhaos. That gives you a bit of an understanding, or I guess a bit of insight into what they were trying to think of here, is to think of San Zhao as the connecting meridian. It connects all 3 of the zhaos together. So then when it started coming into English translations, and rather than saying San Zhao, it then started to be 3 or triple. So you have triple heater, triple warmer, triple burner, or triple energizer, right? Idea being is that triple, because it impacts on all 3 of the zhaos, and also it's this idea, this concept of heat, warmth, or energy. All right, they were kind of interchangeable terms in Chinese medicine, so that's why you have heater, burner, warmer. Basically, if you're looking at a textbook, right, and it says the word triple, assume that's triple energizer. What I find quite amusing about this is there's all of these connections to the specific organs that we think in Western medicine actually exist, but they miss out the brain. There isn't a brain meridian. The brain, I think, was considered to be a little bit of bone marrow. Maybe he's got that one a little bit wrong, right? They knew about the attributes of the brain because they've separated all of the attributes out to all of the other organs in the body. So it's not to say that they dismissed the concept of a consciousness and a mind and the things that the brain does. It's just that the brain meridian in itself the brain doesn't do anything. It's not a meridian. So I find it quite amusing that they've gone to some lengths to create effectively 2 organs that don't exist, to try and make this balance of yin and yang and an even number, and then also this idea that it connects the body up. So maybe triple energizer is kind of a representation of the brain, but I think we're really, really stretching credibility there, right? If we're going to be saying that, but there you are, right? It's an The other thing I would say about triple energizer, by the way, is that it definitely needs some kind of disclaimer against it, that it sounds like an absolutely fantastic meridian, right? Triple energizer sounds like you're going to fire lasers from your eyes, right? You just do like, power. It's good for like shoulder pain, good for elbow pain. I mean, very good for shoulder pain, elbow pain. Not really much else. All right, so the next ones we'll move on to. We've got the heart and the small intestine. So the small intestine is a yang meridian. Yes, it's connected to what we think about the small intestine, but a lot more to do with, as we now know, yang being about pain, power, and range of movement. So it's more about musculoskeletal problems, particularly around the upper limb. The small intestine meridian comes from your little finger, comes down the medial-posterior aspect of your lower elbow, posterior medial aspect of your upper arm, goes over your scapula, comes up your side of your neck, over levator scap, and then kind of terminates here in front of your trace, in front of your ear. So it covers your upper limb, and that's pretty much it, a little bit into your face and side of the neck. Its yin partner is the heart. Probably no massive surprise here, but the heart meridian is really, really important. Your heart in Chinese medicine was sometimes referred to as the emperor organ, the boss, right? The overseer of all things. And if your heart is out of kilter, everything else starts following suit. And that's no big surprise, right? Because in Western medicine, we put a pretty big emphasis on the importance of our heart, right? So they will talk about the heart meridian in terms of how we would refer to the heart. So things like palpitations, chest pain, that kind of things. But in Chinese medicine, if you were to say to somebody you've got a heart problem, it can mean something very, very different to what it would be in Western medicine, because a heart problem in Chinese medicine would also include things like insomnia, and particularly around too much going on in your head. So in Chinese medicine, the heart is a chamber that helps to contain our spirits. We've got 4 or 5 spirits called the Shen, right? And the 4 Shen, I'm probably not going to forget all of these now, right? But we'll have the 4 Shen, which is the Po, the Yi, the Ji, and the little Shen. There's a Shen within the big Shen, right? So they're kind of our 4 spirits that sit within our heart. And if the heart is strong, it helps control those 4 spirits. Not to say that it contains them and the spirit isn't allowed to escape, but just to help manage it, helps to filter how much of the spirit is allowed to fly out. If your heart is weak, what tends to happen is your spirits, or your Shen, want to get out, and particularly want to get out at night. So if your heart is weak and then your Shen, your 4 Shen are able to escape the heart, your mind is full. So you just can't concentrate, or you're trying to get to sleep, and there's just all of these things, these ideas running through your head. And that's a sign that your heart is weak, okay? So that's why we have to make a really big distinction in when we're saying to somebody, oh, I think you've got a heart problem. Because if we're saying a heart problem in Western medicine, that's usually a big deal. In Chinese medicine, it's a big deal, but, struggling to get to sleep and having a heart attack, they have, I guess, slightly different outcomes, right? At least in the short term anyway. So there's your heart for you. Then we move on to the bladder, the kidney. Now, the bladder meridian is the largest meridian by far. So if you look at here, right, the bladder meridian comes from the corner of your eye, so your inner canthus here, and right next to your tear duct. It comes up your forehead. It goes over the top of your head, so it comes over here. And then what it does, it comes down the back of your head, all the way down your spine to your glutes. It then diverges internally. So this is a bit of a weird one, right? Imagine you've got this river, right? And then the river drops off into a cave, and then it reappears somewhere back up, right? And that kind of happens with the bladder meridian, right? So it comes down to the buttocks at the bladder 40. It goes into its cave, so it goes internally, and then it reappears back up here at the top of your thorax, around T3. So you've got this, what we call the inner bladder line. So that's the bladder line that hugs the spinous process of each spinous process. And then when it reappears at T3, it's a little bit further out, and that's referred to as your outer bladder line. So that starts off at bladder 41, goes all the way down to bladder 52, and then it diverges internally again, and then reappears at the back of your knee, and then goes down your calf, down your lateral ankle. So come down here, down the back of your calf, posterior lateral aspect of your calf, around your lateral malleolus, and then terminates at bladder 67, monster of a meridian, your little toe. So the bladder meridian, if you can just think it's a yang meridian, right, so it's going to do all your pain, power, range of movement. Because it covers the whole length of your body, it pretty much does everything, all right? Pretty much does anything you can think of. If you've got a musculoskeletal problem that resides on the posterior aspect of your body, you are definitely going to be needling a bladder point at some point in time. All right, so it's a very commonly used meridian. So it's a massive meridian for lots and lots of different reasons. Now, yes, they thought it was a bladder meridian in Chinese medicine. The bladder was thought to store your urine, and it's emptying, so it's got all that kind of stuff. The added benefit, or the added addition to the bladder meridian, which makes this a really, really important meridian, is that a collection of those bladder points that are on the inner bladder line. So remember, these bladder points are talked about here that are really close to the spinous processes of each spinous process down here, right? This inner bladder line also have connections with each one of the other organs, and they're referred to as the back shoe points. So the back shoe points translates into transport. So they transport chi from that point to the organ and vice versa. So the lung meridian or the lung organ has a bladder back shoe point. The spleen organ has a bladder back shoe point. The heart organ has a bladder back shoe point. And you can trace all of these down, right? So they're actually named after the organ itself. So it's called heart shoe or kidney shoe or spleen shoe. And so you can find them all in there. So don't have a lot of time to go loads into the detail of the back shoe points, but broadly speaking, the back shoe points are really important when we're doing particularly some kind of Chinese medicine approach to our acupuncture. And they're all on the bladder meridian. So super duper powerful meridian. Now the bladder meridian is connected to the kidney. The kidney meridian in Chinese medicine is a really interesting concept. So the kidney meridian's yin, right? So we know that yin's more about your general health and your well-being and all that kind of stuff. Your Jing Qi, so Jing spelled Jing, is sometimes referred to or compared to as your essence Qi, so your main essence. This is your energy that you're given when you're born. Okay, so you can't get more Jing Qi once you're born. You can only, you get what you're given at birth, and you can only take away from it. You can't add to it, right? So imagine it's like a savings account. You had a really rich auntie that passed away just before you were born, and she left you a huge sum of money in an account, but it doesn't create any interest. You can't generate any income from it. You can't go and spend more to go and put more back into the account, all right? So you've basically, once that money that's in there, that's all you've got, right? And you have to withdraw from it as you go on through life. And so your Jing Qi is stored within your kidney, all right? And so when we read about what the kidney meridian specifically does, we see a lot of references that relate to aging. So stereotypical aging in Chinese medicine is an indicative sign that your Jing Qi is depleting. It's getting withdrawn from the savings account. Grey hair, loss of teeth, poor eyesight, tinnitus or loss of hearing, loss of taste, frailty, tripping over, poor sleep, frequency urinating or incontinence, frequency going to the toilet through the night. Basically any symptoms that you might expect a stereotypical frail elderly person to demonstrate, in Chinese medicine, that is thought to be an external sign that your Jing Qi is being depleted. That is to say that your kidney is being asked to make all of these withdrawals all the time. And so I guess it's no surprise that kidney qi in Chinese medicine has got a really, really important role to play in our general health. So we find that kidney acupuncture points are often quoted in chronic conditions, and certainly any conditions that have got some kind of association with aging. So a really interesting meridian, and certainly the concept of the kidney in Chinese medicine, it has a lot more wider ranging impact than it perhaps does in Western medicine. Not to say that in Western medicine that your kidneys aren't important. Absolutely, of course they are, right? But in Chinese medicine, it just goes a little bit further than that. And then when we go from them, we then come to our final pair of meridians, which is our liver and our gallbladder. So our gallbladder meridian is the yang meridian. Yang, pain, power, and range of movement. But more particularly about the yang meridian of gallbladder is that it's thought to do a lot with the musculoskeletal system itself. So something like gallbladder 34 is this nourishing point of all of the soft tissues anywhere in the body. So, if you were thinking about any treatment of, say, like a shoulder problem or an ankle problem or a knee problem, if it's a soft tissue related problem, actually gallbladder 34 would be indicated. That's in Chinese medicine philosophy, but nevertheless, it would be one of the points that you could think about using. The other thing that you would use gallbladder points for a lot is neurological conditions. So migraines, it could be things like stroke, MS. Basically, anything that's neurological sits within the gallbladder and the liver meridian, so these kind of two go hand in hand. And then finally, the liver meridian is sometimes referred to as the general. So it kind of mobilizes things. It gets things moving around the body. So the liver chi is really responsible for moving blood. So in and of itself, it doesn't create the blood, but it kind of goes hand in hand with the spleen to push the blood around the body. And certainly in the lower limb, it's about moving the chi around the body as well. So super duper points for the liver. We don't tend to use a lot of liver points as in the full meridian, but we definitely use one or two of them a lot. So like liver 3 is like a super duper point, right? Gets used for all sorts of things. It's the cardinal point for headaches, for example. It's part of the 4 gates. So liver 3 and large intestine 4, that the most famous of all recipes in acupuncture. So there's a handful, 2, maybe 3 points in the liver that are super, super important, and they get used a lot, but a lot of points in the liver meridian that don't get used, or I wouldn't say as used as commonly as they would do on other points on other meridians. So that's your 12 main meridians. That's what was sometimes referred to as the primary channels of acupuncture. You then have either referred to as the extra meridians or the secondary channels. Now, the secondary channels tend to be kind of connecting meridians. So they're not a meridian in them of themselves, but it's like a combination of a little bit of a liver, a little bit of a spleen, and a little bit of a lung. And it kind of connects the meridians up together there. Now, that as a concept is pretty difficult to get across just as me talking to camera. So I think I might do a separate pod on that one. If you're interested in that, let us know, because I'll delve into a little bit more, and I'll put some diagrams up and I'll draw some stuff out for you to try and really get that into your head. But the other ones, what we call, there's the extra meridians. There's 3 that you will hear about often, right? So you've got the Huatojachi, so HJJ for abbreviations, and the Huatojachi points that are just solely over the spine. So they just sit over the spine, each level of the spine, and they basically are very good for a very specific problem. So like if you've got a problem at T3, if you've got a problem at T5, you would put the Huatojachi point in at T5 or T3. If you've got a problem at L4, you would put a Huatojachi point at L4. Very good to be specific and super local. Don't do a lot in and of themselves, so you would always combine that with a meridian, a primary meridian point. So the obvious one would be the bladder, because that's the one that goes over the spine. So yeah, it's very helpful, but not really super powerful, and it's not related to an organ. You then have the governor meridian and the conception vessel. So the governor meridian, or sometimes referred to as the governor, right? The governor meridian, or often you'll hear it as called DU, D-U, the DU meridian. So the governor is more of a yang type organ, right? So it does yang, it has yang energy, so pain, power, range of movement. Really, the governor meridian is predominantly doing spinal problems and some very good stuff. The ones that I really like to pull out with the governor, though, you've got governor 4. So governor 4 helps to strengthen the kidney. And if you read some of the descriptions about governor 4, it talks about the Jing Qi. So remember I talked about the essence, the Jing Qi that kind of is stored within the kidney. Governor 4 is supposed to help influence that. So its name is gate of fire or gate of life. Very, very powerful point just between the spinous processes of L2 and L3. You've got governor 14, which is just between C7 and T1 spinous processes. Really important point called Daju. And Daju is to do with the interconnecting point of all yang meridians. Wow, right? So almost like the epicenter of yang going on there. It's a bit like the pirate port of Nassau, right? Back in the Yule times, where the pirates would hang around in the Caribbean, and Nassau was kind of like the main port in there. It's a bit like that. Just not as many pirates or treasure around there, but just kind of the intersecting point where all the yang meridians kind of hang out, shall we say. And then we've got governor 20 as well. So governor 20, which is the one that sits on the top of your head, sometimes looks like as if you're like, I don't know, you got like a, maybe you're like Bender from Futurama, right? Or you've got like an antenna sitting on the top of your head like a Teletubby. Yeah, that one there on the top of your head. That one's notable because you use it a lot for energy. So uplifting, right? Brings you up and it wakes you up. A bit like caffeine, right? You've just had a treble espresso and it wakes you up. It doesn't last for very long, but it still wakes you up and brings you alive. Actually, there's one or two others. So there's a couple around here that we use for the gag reflex. So dentists, for example, when dentists come onto our acupuncture courses, they're often asking about a gag reflex point, and it's this point here. It's a governor point here, just under your lip, to try and prevent you from gagging. So there's another little snippet there for the governor. Now, the governor meridian is a central meridian, so it's not bilateral. All of these other meridians we've been talking about have something on the left and the right hand side, but because the governor's central, it doesn't have a bilateral thing. But what it does is it has its yin counterpart, which is on the front of the body, and that's called the conception vessel, or sometimes referred to as Ren, E-N, that's the Chinese phrase for it. So the conception vessel, probably not a massive surprise in a lot of things it does, but it's kind of thought to be pure essence yin. So it does a lot of yin stuff. And it does have a lot of mentions about fertility because of where it comes. So it comes over the front of the abdomen, the front of the chest, front of the abdomen over the umbilicus. We see a lot of things that happen in and around the abdomen. We know that often conception vessel points are used for things like bladder. So overactive bladder, which Dr. Emma Hargreaves, who we're very lucky to have working for us, her and myself, I've got a couple of publications, but Emma's PhD was in acupuncture for overactive bladder, and her whole career in women's health has had some focus on overactive bladder. So we'll be using conception vessel points often in our recipes for overactive bladder. So I'm trying to think if there are anything other things that we talk about with the meridians. No, I think we'll leave it there. So, guys, as usual, I really hope that I've been able to get some helpful information or some useful, interesting information. The meridians themselves, we could spend one podcast on every specific meridian. There's so much to talk about, but I guess I've tried to give a flavor of what these meridians are, what their purpose are, what they do, and maybe how we bring this into our clinical practice as well. As always, right? If you've enjoyed this, if you find it helpful, some of you have been getting cracking on with this, and honestly, I can't tell you how much it helps. Like, comment, and share. If you're doing this kind of stuff, it just means that that's giving us the messages that we're doing the right thing, that we're giving you stuff that you find interesting. By the process of you doing that as well, it means like these platforms like YouTube, like Spotify, like Instagram stuff, that's telling them, that's signaling to them, hey, this is the kind of content that I want to see more of. So that tells us as educators, right, we know where we need to direct our resources to be able to help you either become a better clinician, to support you in your day-to-day clinical practice, but also to kind of think about, well, just general interest. You want to hear something from, I would like to think, a fairly reputable source, people who've got some background in this stuff. So that really helps us, that like, comment, and share. And obviously, we run training events, we have memberships. So if you are interested in doing more with us on a more formal basis, maybe doing some like small group activity with myself or one of my very, very, very cool tutors, you just get in touch, right? So you get onto Instagram, you drop us a DM, you head to our website at breeze.academy. But hope it's worked, guys. Please like, comment, and share. See you soon.